He shot at the tiger, shattering her jaw and teeth. Now, she survived, but her injuries made her too weak to catch deer. So she started hunting humans instead. For years, she killed hundreds of people, leaving only bloody scraps behind. Eventually, a famous tracker found her and ended her reign of terror with a gunshot. But when he looked closer, he saw the broken teeth and realized she didn't choose to kill humans. She had to because of her injury. As you eat the bread and it moves into your stomach, if you have too much yeast in your digestive system, it starts to eat the sugars in the bread. As the sugars break down, it releases carbon dioxide and alcohol. And this is the same process used to make beer. Meaning, when the alcohol moves into your bloodstream, you'll start to feel drunk just from eating bread. This rare condition means you could be too drunk to drive, even if you haven't had a single drink. But if you can prove you have this condition, the police might just let you go. He hit the ball so hard, the bat cracked. But as the splinters flew, the umpires noticed something odd. When they looked closer, they found a cork inside. You see, some players would drill a hole in their bat, removing the heavy wood and replacing it with a much lighter piece of cork. And this made the bat swing faster. He was immediately thrown out for cheating, but insisted it was a practice bat that got mixed up by accident. Now, this player was known for hitting over 500 home runs, so fans were left wondering if his entire career was all just a sham. As the priest lit the fire, the heat traveled to a round water tank below the floor, expanding the air inside. This forced the water through the pipes and into another container, filling it up. The weight pulled two chains connected to the door, making them swing open by themselves. And when the fire went out, the air cooled, which sucked the water back into the tank, lifting the container and closing the doors. He flew over the handlebars and landed chest first on a branch. It pierced 4 inches into his chest, puncturing a lung and snapping 8 ribs. But adrenaline kicked in, and he thought it was just a shoulder injury. So he stood up and walked through the woods while bleeding. And instead of calling 911, he just called his wife. Doctors later found a hole in his lung, a torn vein, and a wound half a centimeter from his heart. But he somehow survived. When the riders grip their handlebars too hard, the muscles in their forearms can actually get too big, and the tissue holding them together gets pulled tight. Inside, the blood vessels are squeezed, stopping the blood from flowing and turning their arms numb. To fix this, an incision is made in their arm and the tissue holding the muscles together is cut. This releases the pressure and allows the muscles to grow while opening the blood vessels. But it leaves them all with a massive scar. It slithered toward her as she was washing dishes and suddenly bit her thigh. And as she screamed, the 16-foot-long python wrapped itself around her body. The 64-year-old was pinned to the floor of her kitchen, unable to move as the snake squeezed tighter with every breath she took. She screamed for help for 2 hours. Finally, a neighbor heard her cries and called the police. And when rescuers arrived, they beat the snake with a crowbar until it finally let go and slithered away. The woman survived, but the python was never captured. As he snuck onto the roof, he didn't see the glass window, which was painted to match. As soon as he stepped on it, he crashed through the glass, landing headfirst on the gym floor. You see, he climbed up there to try and steal a spotlight from the school, but the fall left him paralyzed and unable to speak. And instead of being arrested, he sued the school. They ended up paying him over $250,000, plus a monthly salary for the rest of his life, even though he was robbing them when he fell. They would throw the harpoon into the whale, causing it to suddenly panic. And as it tried to escape, it would drag the small boat behind it. Now, it could swim for miles and reach speeds of 23 miles per hour, meaning the hunters had to hold on tight. But as it dragged the boat, it got tired, and since it was losing blood, it would eventually grow weak. That's when the hunters would reel it in and slaughter it. But some whales would dive deep instead of swimming forward, drowning the whalers before they could kill it. If a nuke is being dropped on your city and you try to shoot it down, some people think that would make it explode. But after piercing the armor, the bullet would have to ignite a layer of explosives that surround the core. And this is what would set off the nuclear explosion. But this layer of explosives is incredibly stable and can only be triggered by a detonator. Now, the detonator wire is only a fraction of an inch wide, meaning if the bullet cut it in half, it would actually disable the bomb, making it drop to the ground without going off. If you jumped off a skyscraper holding a leaf blower, could it work like a jetpack? Well, a leaf blower only pushes out 7 cubic feet of air per second, meaning you would just crash to the ground. You would need a leaf blower the size of a motorcycle, pushing out air as fast as a jet engine just to survive the fall. But even if you could hold on to it, the engine is heavier than the tube. This means it would flip you upside down, blasting you into the ground at higher speeds. The foul ball flew straight at the woman's face and instantly broke her nose. There was blood everywhere, and medics rushed to help. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, the game continued, and on the very next pitch, another foul ball flew through the air. It hit the same woman in the knee, fracturing her bone. And even though she was treated, she only watched from the left field bleachers after that. If you were shrunk down and landed on someone's nose, you'd be surrounded by these black wax-filled craters. If you slipped into one, you would fall through a tunnel of dead skin and bacteria. The walls would be slick and warm, coated in layers of oil. And while you were trying to climb out, fresh oil would start seeping in from the sides. It would rise fast, filling the space and pushing you deeper. To escape, you would need to somehow scale the walls quickly before the next surge buried you alive. He had another head growing right on top of his own, one that could blink and smile independently. And this head was actually his twin that didn't fully separate in the womb. It would cry when he laughed and stare blankly when he slept. Now, each head was actually functioning off of their own separate brains. But when he was 4, the boy was bitten by a snake, and both heads passed away together. If you used a mile-long ruler to measure a coastline, you'll get a number that sounds about right. But if you switch to a yardstick, you'll measure in more detail, giving you a much bigger number. And if you use a 1-foot ruler, the number will grow again. This is because every time the unit of measurement shrinks, you're measuring smaller curves and details that the larger stick missed. The closer you zoom in, the more detail you see, and the more curves there are to measure, meaning the length of a coastline keeps getting longer, almost like it never ends. She suddenly collapsed during a first date, falling unconscious to the floor. Now, her date panicked, thinking she had just died in his house. But instead of calling for help, he decided to bury her in his backyard. Days passed and her family filed her as missing, and police eventually searched his home and found the fresh grave. Her autopsy revealed that she had a diabetic episode, which sent her into a coma when she collapsed, but she wasn't dead at that point. They learned she actually died from suffocation in the grave. The man immediately confessed, but he was only charged with manslaughter. If planes towed a massive bag, could they catch a cloud? Well, clouds can be over 6 miles wide, holding billions of pounds of water. And even if you had a bag big enough to hold it, it would act like a giant parachute, creating so much drag that the engines couldn't keep moving. But if the planes were powerful enough, you might be able to actually capture the cloud. However, once the vapor turned back into liquid, the weight of it would snap tow cables, crushing the planes as they fall out of the sky. Imagine you run a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and each of these rooms has a guest staying in it. But then one more shows up asking for a room. Now you might think there's no space, but your hotel has infinite rooms. So you just have to ask the guest in room 1 to move to room 2. Then room 2 moves to room 3, repeating all the way to infinity. Now you have an available room for the new guest. But what happens when a bus pulls up and it has an infinite amount of passengers? You would need more than just one empty room. So to make sure you have enough space, you ask every guest already in the hotel to double their room number. The people in room 1 go to room 2, and room 2 goes to room 4, room 3 to room 6, all the way to infinity. Now all the odd number rooms are empty, 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. And since there are infinite odd numbers, you can fit every person from the bus. And this is possible because infinity isn't just big, it bends logic, making space where none should exist. If you dumped out a lava lamp and poured in real lava, the glass would just instantly shatter. Instead, you would need to carve the jar out of solid sapphire just to withstand the heat. And to avoid the water turning to steam, you would need to float the lava in molten glass. But since the heat would make them both glow, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. And without a heat source, the lamp would start cooling quickly, meaning in just a few minutes, your lava lamp would just be a rock in a jar.